The smell of bleach and old grease was the scent of my future. Or so I believed. For 10 hours a day I was Leo Vance, lord of the dish pit at a greasy spoon diner where the only thing older than the coffee pot was the grime in the grout. My hands were perpetually chapped, and my back ached with the kind of deep, generational weariness I'd seen in my father and his father before him. They were men of steel and sweat who believed a hard day's work was its own reward. I believed it was a slow-motion prison sentence. That's why I was standing in a piss-scented alley off Wacker Drive at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, clutching a black paper coaster. I'd found it tucked under a salt shaker at the diner, silver ink spelling out a bizarre scavenger hunt instead of a simple address. Find the alley with the single green lamppost. Look for the unmarked oak door with the iron raven knocker. Knock 3 times. Pause. Then once. Then twice. It was the strangest job application I'd ever seen, and the only lifeline I had. I took a deep breath, the cold Chicago air stinging my lungs, and performed the ridiculous knock. For a moment, nothing. Then, a small slot slid open at eye level, revealing a pair of dark, unblinking eyes. A low grunt, and the heavy door swung inward. The man who opened it was a mountain. He was built like a retired heavyweight, with a stony face and shoulders that seemed to challenge the structural integrity of his tailored black suit. He just stared at me, his silence a wall. I'm here about the job," I stammered, holding up the coaster like a shield. He grunted again, apparently his primary mode of communication, and stepped aside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the alley's stench vanished, replaced by the rich aroma of polished mahogany, old leather, and something sweet and spicy, like cloves and bourbon. I was in the cellar door. It was beautiful. Low amber light glinted off a constellation of glassware behind a long, dark wood bar. Muted jazz music drifted from an unseen source, and the handful of patrons spoke in hushed, intimate tones. It was a world away from the clatter and steam I'd just left. "He's waiting for you." The mountain's voice was a low rumble, and he nodded toward a man sitting at the far end of the bar. The man was the polar opposite of the bouncer. He was slender and poised, with a shock of silver hair combed neatly back from his forehead. His suit was impossibly sharp, and as I approached, he turned. His eyes were a pale, piercing gray that seemed to take in my entire life story in a single glance. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "I am Alistair Finch. The bouncer you've just met is Silvio. He is a man of few words but great consequence." He gestured to the empty space behind the bar. "I don't have time for interviews. Show me you can make an old-fashioned, the proper way." My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands, for once, were steady. I'd spent countless nights after my dishwashing shifts practicing, dreaming of this exact moment. I moved behind the bar, the wood cool and solid beneath my fingers. I chilled the glass, muddled the sugar and bitters just so, selected a large, clear cube of ice, and poured the rye with a practiced hand. I finished it with a twist of orange peel, expressing the oils over the surface before dropping it in. I slid the finished drink in front of him. Mr. Finch picked it up, observed the color, and took a slow, deliberate sip. He closed his eyes for a second, then set the glass down with a soft click. "You start tonight," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. He reached into his coat and produced a single, folded piece of thick, cream-colored paper. "There are, however, conditions to your employment." He slid the paper across the bar. I unfolded it. The script was an elegant, old-fashioned cursive, written in black ink. It wasn't a list so much as a set of decrees. The first was a command, underlined twice. Never, under any circumstances, was I to serve a drink to a customer wearing white gloves. The next instruction was bizarrely specific. If a patron asked for the house special, I was to serve them a simple glass of water and inform them we were closing soon, no matter the actual time. My eyes scanned further down the page. At precisely 2 in the morning, Mr. Finch would ring a small brass bell, and my job was to immediately unlock the front door, regardless of who might be outside. A stark warning followed that. I was never to enter the cellar alone. One rule dealt with payment. If a customer paid with silver coins dated before 1964, their drink was free. I was to accept the coins but keep them separate from the register's cash. Perhaps the most chilling rule was about patrons who might begin walking backwards. I was instructed not to speak to them, not to touch them, but to simply avert my eyes and carry on with my work. And the final rule, a perfect, circular piece of logic, was to not ask questions about any of the rules. I stared at the paper, my mind reeling. This wasn't an employee handbook. It was a page from a madman's diary. I looked up at Mr. Finch, who was watching me with that same unnerving intensity. "Memorize them," he said softly. "Then burn this. You're not here to just pour drinks, Leo. You're here to tend the door." He pushed a small brass lighter and an ashtray toward me. My hand trembled as I lit the corner of the paper. The flame licked hungrily at the strange edicts, turning them to black, curling ash. The rules were gone, but they were seared into my mind. My shift was about to begin. The starched white shirt felt like a costume, and the silence behind the bar was 1,000 times more intimidating than the chaos of the dish pit. Mr. Finch had introduced me to Clara Diaz, the bar's other tender, before retreating to his usual perch at the end of the bar. She was a woman who looked to be in her 40s, with sharp, dark eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun. Every movement she made was economical and precise, from the way she polished a glass to the way she measured a pour. She didn't waste a single motion. "Forget what you think you know," she said, her voice low and even, not looking at me as she stalked fresh mint. "This isn't about speed. It's about rhythm. You feel the room, you watch the patrons, and most importantly, you follow the rules." She finally turned to me, her gaze pinning me in place. "The rules aren't suggestions, Leo. They're physics, they're gravity. You don't question them. You just obey them, or you'll pull the whole house down." For the next few hours, I shadowed her. She taught me the bar's quirks, which floorboard creaked, which whiskey a certain regular preferred, how to mix their signature cocktails that weren't on any menu. It was a masterclass in bartending, but underneath it all, the 7 rules I'd burned hummed in my mind like a high-voltage wire. I found myself surreptitiously checking customers' hands, my stomach tightening every time someone new walked in. The first test came just after midnight. The front door opened, letting in a swirl of cold air and a woman who seemed to glide rather than walk. She was impossibly elegant in a dark velvet dress, her face pale and beautiful under the dim lights, and on her hands she wore a pair of pristine, elbow-length white gloves. She sat at the bar, directly in front of me, and smiled a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "A martini, please, very dry." My bartender instincts, honed by months of desperate practice, kicked in. I reached for the gin and the shaker, my body moving before my brain could catch up and scream a warning. But before my fingers could touch the bottle, Clara's hand was on my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her touch ice cold. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," Clara said, her voice as smooth as cream. "We've just run out of the proper chilled glasses for our martinis. It would be an insult to serve you one in anything else. Perhaps another time?" The woman's smile tightened for a fraction of a second. The warmth in her eyes vanished completely, leaving behind something empty and ancient. "A shame," she whispered, her voice like rustling leaves. She stood, turned, and glided out of the bar as silently as she had entered. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "What would have?" I started to ask. "Don't," Clara cut me off, her eyes fixed on the door. "Some doors are best left unopened. Some hands are best left unshaken. Just be glad you didn't pour that drink." Her tone was flat, but I could hear a tremor of genuine fear beneath it, and that scared me more than anything. The rest of the night passed in a tense quiet. The crowd thinned, leaving only a few lingering patrons. As the clock on the wall crept toward 2, I noticed Mr. Finch straighten up, his attention fixed on a small, ornate brass bell that sat on the back bar. At precisely 2 a.m., he reached out and flicked it with his finger. The sound wasn't loud, but it was piercing, a pure, clean tone that cut through the murmur of conversation and the soft jazz. It seemed to vibrate in my bones. As instructed, Clara moved without hesitation. In a single, fluid motion, she walked to the front door, turned the deadbolt, and left it unlocked. She returned to the bar, her expression placid, her hands resuming their task of wiping down the counter. An unnerving silence fell over the room. And then I heard it. It started faint, a dry, dragging scrape from directly beneath my feet. From the cellar. It sounded like a heavy sack of gravel being pulled across unfinished floorboards, punctuated by the unmistakable stomach-churning sound of long nails or claws digging into splintering wood. The sound grew louder, moving with a horrifying purpose from the center of the building toward the front, toward the now unlocked door. My blood ran cold. I looked wildly at Clara, my mouth open to shout, to ask what in God's name was happening. She must have felt my panic, because she glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Wipe the counter," she murmured. "It will pass." The scratching reached the threshold, paused for a long, agonizing moment, and then faded into the silence of the street outside. I stood frozen, my knuckles white on the edge of the bar. "You." Clara finished polishing a final glass and set it on the rack. "Your most important job here," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "is learning what to ignore." The sound of the scratching from the cellar haunted my next few shifts. I tried to follow Clara's advice, tried to ignore it, but it was like trying to ignore a scream in a library. The silence that followed the 2 a.m. bell was now filled with a dreadful anticipation. I'd find myself polishing the same glass for 10 minutes straight, my ears straining for that first dry scrape from below. The other patrons, the regulars, seemed oblivious. They'd sip their drinks, lost in conversation, as if the floor beneath them wasn't a doorway to God knows what. It was a performance of normalcy, and I was a terrible actor. A few nights later, a man I hadn't seen before walked in. He wore a suit that was worth more than my car, with a gold watch that gleamed under the amber lights. He carried himself with an air of easy authority, the kind of man who was used to getting exactly what he wanted. He took a seat at the bar, scanned the top shelf, and then looked directly at me. "I'll have the house special," he said, his voice confident. My mind went blank. The second rule. My heart gave a painful thud against my ribs. I glanced at Clara, who was at the other end of the bar. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "I'm sorry, sir," I began, my own voice sounding thin. "I'm not familiar with that one." "Don't be coy," he said, with a dismissive wave of his hand. "The house special. Your best stuff. Pour it." This time, Clara stepped in, placing a small napkin on the bar in front of him. "My apologies, Mr. Corbin. My new colleague is still learning the ropes." She moved with an unnerving calm, taking a clean glass and filling it with ice water from the tap. She set it down in front of him. "Here you are." Mr. Corbin stared at the glass of water as if it were a dead rat. A flicker of confusion crossed his features. "This isn't it." "I'm afraid it is," Clara said, her voice gentle but firm. "And we'll be closing up for the night very soon." It was only 10:30. The man's eyes unfocused slightly. The confidence drained from his face, replaced by a vacant look. He looked down at the water, then back up at Clara, then back at the water. The loop was broken. He blinked slowly, like a waking child. "Oh, right, closing." He slid a few bills onto the counter, far too much for a glass of water, and walked out of the bar without another word, leaving the money and the full glass behind. As soon as the door clicked shut, I turned to Clara. "What the hell was that? Who is he?" Clara sighed, a deep, weary sound. She picked up the untouched glass and poured the water down the sink. "That," she said, her voice dropping low, "is a lesson. His name is Arthur Corbin. He used to be a regular. A real big shot. A banker or something. He thought the rules were a joke, a gimmick." She leaned closer, her dark eyes filled with a chilling gravity. "About a year ago, during a busy night, he thought no one was watching. He told his friends he was going to see what was really in the cellar. Mr. Finch had just stepped out, and I was swamped. He slipped past the staff door and went down there." "What happened to him?" I whispered, my throat tight. "He was down there for maybe 3 minutes. When he came back up, he wasn't right. He's not a ghost, not exactly. He's just stuck, like a record with a scratch that plays the same few notes over and over. He comes in, asks for the house special, gets his water, and leaves. That's his whole world now. He's not a man anymore, Leo. He's an echo." The story settled in my stomach like a block of ice. We closed up an hour later, the last of the real patrons drifting out into the Chicago night. Silvio locked the heavy front door, the deadbolt sounding like a cannon in the quiet room. I was wiping down tables, the image of Mr. Corbin's empty eyes burned into my mind, when a new sound started. Knock, knock, knock. It came from the front door. It wasn't the coded knock of a patron. It was steady, persistent, and mindless. Silvio, who had been standing by the staff entrance, didn't move a muscle, but his whole body went rigid. I crept toward the door and peered through the peephole. My blood turned to ice. It was Mr. Corbin. His face was pale in the green glow of the alley lamppost, his eyes completely blank. He wasn't looking at the door, he was just staring into the middle distance, his hand rising and falling mechanically, knocking on the wood. "He's back," I breathed, stepping away from the door. Mr. Finch emerged from his office, his expression serene. He walked over, glanced through the peephole himself, and then looked at us. "He does this sometimes," he said, his voice calm and final. "His loop brings him back, but the door is locked. He can't get in." He looked at the clock on the wall. "And we can't leave. We just have to wait. He'll be gone by dawn." The knocking lasted for what felt like an eternity. For 3.5 hours, the mindless, rhythmic tap of Arthur Corbin's knuckles on the oak door was the only sound in the universe. It was a maddening metronome counting down the seconds of my sanity. Silvio stood like a statue carved from granite, his eyes fixed on the door. I paced, wiping down counters that were already spotless, my nerves shredded raw. By the time the first hint of gray dawn broke through the alley's gloom and the knocking finally ceased, I was trembling with exhaustion, and a fear so profound it felt like a physical illness. Mr. Finch watched me, his pale gray eyes missing nothing. He let the silence settle for a long moment after Silvio had checked the peephole and confirmed Corbin was gone. "Curiosity, when left untended, curdles into fear, Leo," he said, his voice soft in the quiet bar, "and fear makes for a clumsy bartender. I think it's time you understood the nature of your duties." He nodded toward the staff door at the back. "Silvio, join us." My stomach plummeted. He was taking me to the cellar. Silvio grunted in acknowledgement and retrieved something from a locker, a heavy, black Maglite flashlight, the old kind made of solid metal that could just as easily be used as a club. Mr. Finch led the way, unlocking a heavy, dark-wood door I'd been trying my best to ignore. The moment he opened it, a wave of cool, subterranean air washed over us, carrying the scent of damp earth, ozone, and something else, something ancient and metallic, like old blood. The stairs were steep and stone. As we descended, the familiar, comforting sounds of the bar faded, replaced by the echo of our own footsteps. Rule number 4 echoed in my head. You are never to enter the cellar alone. Watching Silvio's massive form descend ahead of me, flashlight in hand, I understood why. This wasn't about getting lost. It was about needing a guard. The cellar wasn't what I expected. There were no dusty wine racks or forgotten crates of liquor. It was a single, large, brick-lined room, surprisingly clean. The floor was worn stone, and the only contents were a few sturdy, empty shelves. The air was heavy, charged with a strange energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. "Most people think this place is just a bar," Mr. Finch said, his voice echoing slightly in the chamber. "A clever revival of a Prohibition-era speakeasy. But that's just the sign on the door. The bar isn't the business, Leo. The door is. He gestured to the far wall. It looked solid, but as I drew closer, I could see it was different from the others. The bricks were older, darker, and the mortar was crumbling in places. It wasn't a wall, it was a seal, and at its base was a dark, arched opening, a gaping maw leading into absolute blackness. Chicago is built on secrets, Mr. Finch continued, his voice taking on a professorial tone. Underneath the city we know, there's another, older city. A web of forgotten freight tunnels, sewer systems, passages built by bootleggers and tycoons. This cellar is a nexus, a crossroads. From here you can get to the old meatpacking district. You can get to the abandoned streetcar tunnels. If you walk long enough in that direction, he pointed into the darkness, you'll end up under Graceland Cemetery. I stared into the oppressive blackness, my imagination populating it with 1,000 horrors. But what does that have to do with us? With the rules? Everything, he said, turning to face me, his expression grave. This place is a border crossing, and the things that live in those tunnels, they are old. Forgotten. They are the echoes, like Mr. Corbin. They are drawn to the warmth and the noise of the living. A long time ago, an agreement was struck. This bar, the cellar door, serves as a release valve. The 2 a.m. bell, that's the signal. We give them a brief, controlled exit to the surface. 1 hour to feel the night air before they must return. That scratching you hear is the price of admission. In exchange, they stay in the tunnels. They leave the world, and my customers, alone. My head was spinning. The woman in white gloves, the backward-walking man, the scratching, it all snapped into a terrifying, cohesive whole. As if on cue, a sound drifted from the tunnel's opening. It was a wet, dragging sound, followed by a soft, guttural click. Instantly, Silvio tensed. He raised the heavy flashlight, cutting a sharp beam into the darkness. "Boss," he rumbled, his voice tight. Mr. Finch didn't hesitate. "Time to go." As Silvio herded me back toward the stairs, I risked one last glance over my shoulder. His flashlight beam swept across the tunnel opening, and for a split second I saw it, something pale and slick, glistening wetly as it slid back into the deeper darkness. It was gone before my brain could even process its shape. We scrambled up the stairs, and Mr. Finch closed and locked the heavy cellar door behind us. The click of the bolt was the most reassuring sound I had ever heard. I stood there, panting, my back against the solid wood. I wasn't just a bartender escaping a dead-end job anymore. I was a gatekeeper. I was a tender of a very strange door, and I had just seen what lived on the other side. The cellar door remained locked, but my perception of the bar had been fundamentally altered. It was like learning a new color. The mundane conversations of the patrons, the clink of ice in a glass, the low melody of the jazz trio, it all felt like a thin veneer stretched over a deep, resonant abyss. I found myself watching people differently, not just for white gloves or backward steps, but for a certain emptiness in their eyes, a hollowness in their laughter. The trip to the tunnels had tuned me to a new frequency, one that hummed constantly beneath the surface of reality. One quiet Thursday night, an elderly woman took a seat at my end of the bar. She was immaculately dressed in a style that felt 50 years out of date, complete with a small, netted hat and a string of pearls. Her face was a delicate web of wrinkles like crumpled parchment, but her eyes were clear and bright with a deep, quiet sorrow. She ordered a small glass of sherry in a voice that was soft but steady. When it came time to pay, she didn't produce a wallet. Instead, she opened a small, tarnished silver clasp purse and pushed 2 heavy coins across the polished mahogany. They weren't quarters. They were older, heavier, made of real silver. I picked one up. It felt cold in my palm, unnaturally so, as if it had been sitting in a tomb. I could just make out the year on one, 1952. Rule number 5 clicked into place in my mind with the force of a deadbolt. If a patron pays you with silver coins minted before 1964, the drink is on the house. My hand tightened around the coins. I looked up and met her gaze. "There's no charge for this one, ma'am," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "It's on the house." From the end of the bar, I saw Mr. Finch give a slow, deliberate nod of approval. A small, sad smile touched the woman's lips. "That's very kind of you, young man. So few people appreciate the old ways." She took a delicate sip of her sherry. "This place, it feels familiar. It feels close to the tunnels." "You know about the tunnels?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh yes," she said, her eyes looking past me into a memory. "There was a fire, you know. A long time ago, in '53. A gas leak in a service line near the old stockyards. It trapped so many. The passages collapsed. They became tombs." Her voice was wistful, not bitter. Memory is a kind of warmth, you see, when there's nothing else left. She finished her sherry, placing the glass down with a soft click. As she prepared to leave, she paused and looked toward the staff entrance, where Silvio stood, his silent watch. "You work with my grandson," she said softly. "The quiet one. Silvio. He's a good boy. He carries his grief like a shield, but he has a good heart." She turned back to me, her bright eyes locking onto mine. "Please tell him his Sophia was thinking of him." And with that she stood and walked out, disappearing into the Chicago night. I stood there for a moment, the 2 silver coins cold and heavy in my hand. Then, my heart pounding, I walked over to Silvio. He watched me approach, his expression unreadable as always. "Silvio," I started, my throat dry. "A woman was just in here. An old woman. Her name was Sophia. She said she said to tell you she was thinking of you." The change in him was terrifying. The stony mask didn't just crack, it shattered. The color drained from his face, and for the first time, I saw the mountain tremble. He stared at me, his dark eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and raw, agonizing pain. He swallowed hard. "My Nona," he whispered, his voice a rough, broken thing I'd never heard before. "My grandmother's name was Sophia." He leaned against the wall, his massive frame suddenly looking fragile. "She died in an access tunnel fire under the stockyards. In 1953, they never found her body." Later that night, as I shakily polished glasses, Clara came over to me. She'd seen the whole exchange. She knew. "It's starting, isn't it?" I asked her, my voice low. "I'm not just seeing things anymore, I'm feeling them." Clara nodded, her expression a mixture of pity and understanding. "You're developing the sight. It happens. You work the border long enough, you start to see the people waiting to cross. You become sensitive to the in-between places, and the people stuck there." I reached into my pocket. The silver coins were still there, their cold presence a constant reminder. They felt much, much heavier than just silver. Developing the sight, as Clara called it, changed everything. The bar was no longer just a bar. It was a living entity, breathing with secrets. The space between notes in the jazz music felt wider, the shadows in the corners deeper. I could almost feel the presence of the tunnels below my feet, a constant low-frequency hum of forgotten souls. But with this new sensitivity came a new kind of dread. Every patron became a potential mystery, every odd request a potential test. And none were more mysterious than Professor Elias Thorne. He was a regular, a quiet academic from the university who would sit in a corner booth for hours with a stack of books and a single glass of scotch. He was pleasant, unassuming, and I'd always pegged him as harmless. But lately his questions had become more pointed. He'd ask about the bar's history, its foundation, the age of the brickwork. He'd casually inquire about old freight lines and forgotten city infrastructure. It was all cloaked in academic curiosity, but after my tour of the underworld with Mr. Finch, his inquiries felt less like research and more like reconnaissance. The alarm bells truly went off when Clara found his camera. He'd left it behind one evening, tucked into the booth's cushion. Against my better judgment, we opened it. The memory card was filled with dozens of photos of the cellar door, close-ups of the mortar in the cellar stairs, long exposure shots of the alley, even a blurry, hastily taken picture of the sealed archway in the basement. "He's been down there," Silvio rumbled, his voice tight with anger as he stared at the image on the tiny screen. "He didn't use our door." Mr. Finch's expression was grim. "There are other ways in, for those who know where to look. The system is vast. Professor Thorne is no longer just curious. He is an intruder, and intrusions upset the balance. The proof of that imbalance came 2 nights later. It was just before closing, the bar quiet. I was clearing tables when I saw it. A man near the back, one of Thorne's university colleagues who had joined him that evening, stood up from his chair. But instead of walking toward the exit, he turned and began to walk backwards, his movements smooth but utterly unnatural. He moved with a strange, gliding grace, his eyes open but unfocused, as if he were a puppet being pulled by unseen strings. Rule number 6 screamed in my head. Should a customer begin walking backwards, do not speak to them, do not touch them, avert your eyes and carry on with your work. My blood ran cold. I forced myself to turn away, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pretended to wipe down an already clean table, my hands shaking. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the man glide backward through the bar and out the front door, vanishing into the night. It was a silent, terrifying display. A warning. "They're getting agitated," Clara whispered, her face pale. "Thorne's trespassing has disturbed them. They're starting to reach out, to pull at the patrons." Mr. Finch made the decision instantly. "We're doing a sweep. Now." There was no time to question. Silvio grabbed his heavy maglite and a long, cold iron crowbar from a back closet. Mr. Finch, Clara, and I followed him down into the cellar. The air was colder than usual, thick with a palpable tension. Silvio led the way into the tunnel's maw, the beam of his flashlight cutting a nervous path through the oppressive dark. We moved quickly, our footsteps echoing in the silence. We found Professor Thorne in a large, cavernous chamber that smelled of rot and damp earth, what Mr. Finch had called the old meatpacking section. He wasn't alone. He stood in the center of the chamber, his notebook out, furiously scribbling as he watched them. There were 3 of them. Figures vaguely human in shape, made of shadow and dust, and they were all walking backwards. They circled him slowly, their movements jerky and hypnotic. As we watched from the edge of the darkness, Thorne's appearance began to change. His shoulders hunched, his face seemed to slacken, and his own feet began to shuffle, trying to mimic their reverse steps. The entities were transforming him, pulling him into their silent, backward dance. "Now," Mr. Finch commanded. Clara moved with breathtaking speed. She rushed forward and slammed the iron crowbar onto the stone floor between Thorne and the figures. A shower of green sparks erupted, and a sound like a high-pitched shriek echoed through the chamber. The backward-walking figures recoiled as if burned, dissolving back into the deeper shadows of the tunnel. Silvio grabbed the dazed and trembling professor, hauling him to his feet. "Time to go, Professor," he growled. We half-dragged the terrified academic back to the bar. He sat in his booth, shivering, the spell broken. He looked at us, his eyes wide with the true, horrifying scope of what he had stumbled upon. "I'll burn it," he stammered, his voice cracking. "The research, the photos, all of it. I'll burn it all." Mr. Finch just stared at him, his face like stone. "You will. Because you understand now, don't you? Some doors are kept closed for a reason." Professor Thorne kept his word. He destroyed his research, but the damage was already done. His intrusion, followed so closely by our rescue, was like throwing a rock into a still, dark pond. The ripples were spreading. The entities in the tunnels, once content with their brief, nightly release, had been stirred into a state of restless agitation. The very atmosphere of the cellar door grew heavy, pregnant with a new, aggressive energy. The quiet hum beneath the floorboards had become a low, resonant growl. The escalation came on a busy Saturday night. The bar was full, the air thick with laughter, clinking glasses, and the mournful cry of a saxophone. It felt, for a moment, like a normal speakeasy. I was in the middle of mixing a Manhattan when it happened. There was no sound, no warning. It was a silent, synchronized shift in the room's consciousness. One by one, the patrons stopped what they were doing. A woman telling a joke fell silent mid-punchline. A man raising a glass to his lips froze, his hand hovering in midair. The jazz trio's music faltered and died. In the space of 5 seconds, the entire bar fell into a dead, eerie silence. Every customer, all 30 of them, turned their heads in unison. Their faces were blank, their eyes distant and unfocused. And then, as one, they all stood up. My heart seized in my chest. This wasn't one person walking backward. This was all of them. A mass suggestion, a psychic wave that had washed over the entire room. With the slow, deliberate movements of sleepwalkers, they began to walk, not toward the exit, but toward the back of the bar, toward the staff entrance, toward the locked cellar door. Silvio moved instantly, his massive frame a bulwark in the doorway, blocking their path. He didn't touch them, just stood there, an immovable object. The patrons didn't seem to notice him. They simply stopped a few feet away, forming a silent, waiting crowd, their empty eyes all fixed on the door to the world below. "Alistair," Clara said, her voice sharp and laced with a fear I had never heard from her before. "The old agreement is broken. They're not just knocking anymore. They're demanding." Mr. Finch stared at the scene, his usual calm facade finally cracking. He looked older, wearier, the weight of his long tenure settling on his shoulders. "They were provoked. They feel threatened. This is a show of force." "We can't keep this up," Clara insisted, her gaze sweeping over the silent, entranced crowd. "We can't live on the edge of this forever. Another intrusion, another mistake, and they might not stop at the door next time. We need to do something drastic." "What do you propose?" Mr. Finch asked, his voice strained. "The agreement was made a long time ago, by people who are long dead," Clara reasoned, her words coming fast and clear. "The world has changed. Maybe they've changed. We can't just keep locking the door and hoping they stay quiet. It's time for a new negotiation, a new treaty. We need to send an ambassador down there to talk to them directly." Mr. Finch and Silvio both looked at her as if she'd gone mad. "Send someone down there?" Mr. Finch scoffed. "To what? To be torn apart? To end up like Corbin? An empty echo?" "No," I said, the word coming out of my mouth before I had fully formed the thought. All eyes turned to me. The patrons stood motionless, their eerie silence a backdrop to our frantic debate. Clara is right. But it can't be just anyone. I felt it then, a strange pull from beneath the floor, a flicker of recognition. Since my trip into the tunnels, since developing the site, I had become a part of the bar's strange ecosystem. The entities knew me. Sophia had spoken to me. They had tested me with the woman in white gloves. They had shown me their power with the backward walk. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was attuned. "It has to be me," I said, my voice gaining a conviction that surprised even myself. "They're most attuned to me. They've been communicating with me, in their own way. If anyone can go down there and be heard, it's me." Clara looked at me, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of pride and terror. Silvio just shook his head slowly, a silent plea. But Mr. Finch studied my face, searching for something. For fear, for bravado, for the truth. "This isn't a heroic gesture, Leo," he warned, his voice grave. "You would be walking into their world, on their terms. You may not come back. Or worse, you may come back changed." I looked at the silent crowd of puppets, their lives held in a delicate, invisible balance. I thought of my old life, the smell of bleach and the ache in my back. I had come here to escape a dead-end future. I never imagined I'd be volunteering to walk into a tomb to save one. "I know," I said, meeting his gaze. "But someone has to open the door." The cellar felt different this time. The air was not just cold, but electric, humming with a focused, expectant energy. Silvio stood at the top of the stone stairs, his hand resting on the iron crowbar, a silent, worried guardian. Clara had given me a small, unlit lantern, its glass cold in my trembling hand. There was no plan, no weapon, only a desperate hope that words would succeed where locks and rules had begun to fail. "Leo," Mr. Finch said from the top of the stairs, his voice heavy with the gravity of the moment. "Whatever happens, the door will be open for you until dawn. After that." He didn't need to finish. After that, I would be part of the tunnels. I nodded, took a deep breath that did little to calm my racing heart, and stepped through the dark, arched opening. The blackness was absolute. I thumbed the dial on the lantern, and a soft, warm flame flickered to life, pushing the oppressive dark back a few feet. I was alone. I walked slowly, the lantern light creating a small, moving bubble of reality in the immense, silent dark. The tunnel was wider than I remembered, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and centuries of stillness. After about 50 feet, the passage opened into the large, cavernous chamber where we had rescued Professor Thorne. It was no longer empty. They were waiting for me, dozens of them. They stood in a silent semicircle, their forms clearer now, less like shadows and more like faded photographs. I saw figures in turn-of-the-century suits, women in flapper dresses, and men in the simple work clothes of laborers. At their forefront stood a man in a perfectly tailored, expensive suit, his eyes no longer vacant, but filled with a sharp, intelligent light. It was Arthur Corbin, but the echo was gone. He was whole. "The new bartender," Corbin said, his voice not the confused mumble I remembered, but a clear, resonant baritone that echoed in the vast chamber. "We have been waiting for you, the one who sees." My throat was too dry to speak. I just held up the lantern, its light glinting in their pale, watchful eyes. "You have misunderstood our intent," Corbin continued, taking a step forward. "The parlor tricks, the mass suggestion, it was not malice, it was a cry for help. The old agreement is failing. Your world forgets so easily. As memories of us fade up there, we fade down here. We are becoming whispers, echoes. We are losing our purpose." Another figure drifted forward. It was the elegant woman, with the elbow-length white gloves, her hands now bare. "We do not wish to harm your patrons," she said, her voice like the rustle of dry silk. "We envy them. We watch them live, love, and grieve, while we are stuck in a single repeating moment. We want more than a brief walk in the cold night air. We want to be remembered. We want to be useful." This was not a negotiation of threats. It was a plea for existence. They weren't monsters. They were souls adrift, and the bar was their only anchor. An idea, insane and brilliant, sparked in my mind. "What if you had a purpose?" I asked, my voice finally finding its strength. "What if you didn't just pass through the door? What if you stayed?" I returned to the bar an hour later, just as the first hint of dawn was coloring the sky. The patrons were all gone, sent home by Clara and Silvio after they had snapped out of their trance, none of them remembering a thing. I found Mr. Finch, Clara, and Silvio sitting at a table, their faces etched with worry. I presented the entity's offer. The discussion was tense. Mr. Finch was appalled at the idea, Silvio was deeply suspicious, but Clara saw the radical logic in it. And then, a final, unexpected mediator appeared. A soft chill filled the room, and the scent of old perfume and sherry touched the air. Standing near Silvio, visible only to me and, I suspect, to him, was the shimmering, translucent form of his grandmother, Sophia. She looked at her grandson and gave a single, slow nod of approval. For Silvio, that was enough. The mountain had yielded. Mr. Finch, outnumbered and out of options, finally, reluctantly, agreed. The cellar door transformed. The old rules were retired. replaced by a new, revolutionary agreement. 5 of the most coherent entities began to work rotating shifts. Arthur Corbin, his sharp mind restored, became an uncanny financial advisor, his decades of silent observation giving him a unique perspective on the market. Beatrice May, the woman in the white gloves, now barehanded, served drinks and offered quiet, elegant advice on matters of the heart. A 1940s train conductor named William helped patrons navigate career changes and find new directions. They became counselors, guides, their unique positions between life and death, granting them a wisdom no living therapist could possess. The bar thrived, becoming a true sanctuary, a place of healing for the living, staffed by the formerly lost. Mr. Finch promoted me to manager. My job was no longer just to tend the bar, but to act as the bridge between two worlds, overseeing a staff of both the living and the transformed. The 2 a.m. bell no longer signaled a fearful release. Now, when Mr. Finch rang it, it was to signal a shift change, the moment when the night crew, with their pale faces and timeless eyes, would come up from the cellar, ready for another night of work, their purpose finally, wonderfully, restored.